Hello and welcome to my channel, or welcome back to my channel. Hope everyone is doing well. Today I have 4 Reddit stories for you guys. All credit goes to the original posters of these stories, and I will link them in my description. Car trouble in front of my house that still creeps me out. So this happened about 4 years ago. My dad works nights, so I'm home alone until about 2:30 a.m. most days. We live in a pretty quiet area where people usually keep to themselves. One night at about 1 in the morning, there was a knock at the door, and when I checked our peephole, there was a young woman with a car parked near the curb in front of my house. I answered, and she looked really young, maybe 15, 16, or just very youthful. In short, she looked just barely old enough to be driving. She told me that she was having car trouble and asked if I could come check it out and possibly give her car a jump. At this time, I didn't drive, have a car of my own, or knew very much about cars, so I was of little help but offered to call someone if she needed AAA or a tow service. She declined but kept insisting that I check out the lights on her dashboard to see if it was normal. At this point, I just didn't want to be outside with a stranger, so I politely informed her I'd be of little help because I had zero knowledge of cars. I went back inside but kept looking through the peephole. She opened the back door, got into the back seat, and the car drove off. It instantly made my stomach drop and had me extremely freaked out. I was kind of distraught, thinking about what the real person was to approach my house, or what the real reason was to approach my house. Who was driving? Just the entire thing left me confused and frightened. I spent the next few days a little on edge because I was afraid they may return knowing that someone is there or that I was alone. I also think of the girl and who she was. I wish I had a video doorbell at the time so I could find out if she was a victim of some sort. I don't know, it still bothers me a lot and is eerie as hell. I saw a Christmas elf in a sewer when I was younger. This might sound ridiculous compared to some other posts here, but if it's Christmas time anyway, I just decided to share this bizarre experience of mine with you all. It is 100% real, and I made this account specially for the post so that you don't accuse me of farming karma. I don't remember exactly how old I was at the time, but I was still in kindergarten. When my dad picked me up, we often used to stop by in a park on the way home. For a little context, my dad was and is a great man, and when I was little, around the same time, he used to make maps for treasures for me to find, and he would actually hide some real treasures around the park so that I could find them. So back to the story. We were in the park as usual, and while we were walking, there was a sewer hole from which were coming waves of steam, as if it was a furnace. We were heading towards it, and I remember my dad saying, "Look, maybe there's where Santa prepares the gifts for the good children." I laughed a little because around that time I already knew Santa wasn't real. Then as we passed by the hole, I looked through the holes of the covering and saw a man wearing a weird triangle-shaped head. Everything happened very fast, and I could only barely see through the holes and all the steam, but the man was sitting on a table, and it looked as he was writing something. When I saw him, I remember freezing for a little moment, and there were many things going on through my little head. I thought either that was a real elf and my dad was telling the truth, or maybe it was a man hired by him for me to see, just like he hid all the treasures. Anyway, I didn't tell him anything, and he didn't say anything either. When we arrived home, I remember telling my grandma that I saw a Christmas elf in the park, and she laughed and said, "That's great," or something. I knew she didn't believe me. My dad was also laughing. The following days I kept thinking about it, but with time I just went on with the idea that my dad told some man to dress up as an elf and jump in the sewer for me to see, to make me believe in the magic of Christmas. Well, a few years later I finally asked him about it, and he said that he never did this and asked me more about what I saw. I told him, and he said that it was probably just my wild imagination and being little. However, I know exactly what I saw, and I remember it clearly to this day. I even went to the same exact park since then to inspect the area, but a lot has changed since then, and the place looks totally different now. No walking path and no sewer hole, just plain grass. What's even weirder is that as years went by, whenever I remember that man, I start comparing him more and more with myself. I only saw him briefly and from behind, but I could see his hair and the color and type was just as mine. Also, his back looked like mine in some pics I took after I grew up. But this might be just me overthinking it throughout time. Anyway, this was my little story, and whether you believe it or not, it's the second strangest thing that has ever happened to me. My baby came to visit. Sitting in the living room tonight at around 1:32 a.m. with my 15-month-old daughter and my mother-in-law and brother-in-law, because the little one was up way past her bedtime. She was running around near the couch, playing with her uncle and grandma, when one of her toys on the other side of the room started making noise. It's a plastic battery-operated duck that rolls and quacks when he moves or if you press the button. I checked, and this toy was completely stationary at the time, with no other toy touching the button or making it roll around. And there were toys all around it. It happened around 5 or 6 different times, twice in quick successions, all within about 10 minutes. I sat on the floor after the third quack, and it happened again. Then I felt a cold spot move toward my arm, then the duck would quack again. That happened one more time before it stopped. I thought at first it could be vibrations in the floor making it move and quack since my daughter was running around and had sat down near it. So I tested it out myself. I, 23 female, am not a lightweight person. I stood right next to the duck and stomped and jumped as hard as I could, and it didn't move or make a sound even once. Both mother-in-law and brother-in-law witnessed all of this happen. So here's the ghost part of the story. Back in October 2020, I had a missed miscarriage at 8 weeks pregnant, but didn't find out until a week later because something was wrong on the ultrasound, and I needed to be referred to a different doctor. The baby would have been my daughter's older brother, and he was due May 2021, which would have put him at 19 months old. I recently got a custom handmade ornament with his name on it for our Christmas tree this year, so he could still be part of the festivities. All of us think it was my daughter's big brother coming to say hello and play with his little sister for the holidays, and that maybe he was also telling me thank you for remembering him this Christmas. Our boss is making us show up for work even after we die. I didn't know Henry well, but he seemed like a good enough guy. Not very talkative. He always kept a picture on his desk of a little girl that I assumed was his daughter. I'd never bothered to ask. As a sort of experiment, I tried asking him about the picture yesterday, but he didn't acknowledge the question in any way. He just kept staring at the computer screen and steadily typing away. His mouth was slack, and an awful stink was coming from his general vicinity. At break time, which Henry skipped completely, some of my co-workers speculated that he was going through a rough patch. Some kind of domestic trouble, maybe. Maybe the old lady was stepping out. Maybe Henry had been stepping out, and it all caught up to him. But it was hard for me to imagine Henry getting involved in extramarital affairs. I think he's deaf, suggested Franklin. Half the people in the break room laughed, and the rest looked a little dead themselves. I figured I was in the latter half. Dead? Said Ashley, laughing. Dead, said Franklin. All major brain functions seized. Maybe there are still some electrical impulses shooting around in there somehow. But I've seen dead people. My dad ran a funeral home, and the guy is as dead as I've ever seen anybody be. Except he's still somehow moving around doing things. That's impossible, said Ashley. Franklin just shrugged, then got up and poured himself another cup of coffee. Nobody seriously thinks that Henry is dead, said Ashley, right? She turned to me. You don't think that Henry is dead? And I also still sitting there at his computer working. There's something very wrong with Henry, I said carefully. Such as? I couldn't say, and it's not my business to say. If Henry wants to come up to me and tell me, what's wrong with him, I'll listen. But until then, it's none of my business. The half of the room that, like me, thought Henry might actually be dead perked up at this. The absolution of responsibility feels very good. Just before lunch, Henry's arm fell off. It was hard to miss, and yet nobody made any kind of fuss. We all went on typing away at our computers. Henry seemed the least troubled of all about it. The lunch bell rang and Henry didn't even blink. When was the last time he had blinked? And kept working with his one hand, which I saw was very gray or maybe blue. The rest of us gathered in the break room and ate our sandwiches in silence until Franklin piped up. "What do you think now, Ashley? The guy's alive?" "He just has limbs falling off at random, and that doesn't seem to bother him." "Shut up," said somebody. I didn't catch who. "Nah," said Franklin. "This shit ain't right. The guy should be 6 feet underground, or his ashes scattered to the wind, not stuck here in this goddamn office. Is this what happens to all of us?" "Shut up," said somebody else. I saw who said it that time. I just didn't remember his name. Franklin hurled his half-eaten tuna sandwich at the wall and stood up. "Shut up? That's what you want me to do? Fine. But I'll tell you one more thing before I do. I'm not sticking around here. Anybody with 2 functioning brain cells will be right behind me, I imagine." He turned to me. "Right? You've always had a good head on your shoulders." I thought about the mortgage and the baby and how my car was making a funny sound, and the heat bill and all the other bills. Franklin saw my answer without me having to verbalize it. "Fine," he said. "No skin off my ass." The absolution of responsibility feels very good, if you can manage it. Franklin left the break room and turned the corner out of view. After that, we could only hear him. His screams went on for a long time, and then they stopped. When we went back to our desks after lunch, Franklin was staring blankly at his screen, typing away. I always thought that the only thing more terrifying than the prospect of being stuck in a dull job for the rest of your life was to end up on the streets with nothing. The perfect trap. But there was an out. All you had to do was wait a while, and then you die. Nobody would bother you after that. You got an eternity of rest. It was a square deal. But now I am seeing that there are terrifying realities that I never even imagined. I should stop writing. It's time to go to work. Thank you for listening. If you like this type of content, please consider subscribing and liking to my channel, and I will see you on the next one.